Pushpin disclaimer: the story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are purely the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real events is purely coincidental. The content is intended solely for emotional storytelling and entertainment purposes. I never thought I'd come back here. The streets of my hometown looked smaller somehow, maybe because the boy who once ran through them had grown into a man with tired eyes and a heavier heart. Life in the city had drained me, and when my manager suggested I take a break for my mental health, I didn't argue. I packed my bags and came back to the only place that ever felt somewhat like home. It was a cloudy afternoon when I decided to walk to Maplewood Park, the place where I used to spend hours after school. Nothing had changed. The benches were still chipped, the old oak tree stood proudly in the middle, and the small pond still shimmered under the gray sky. And then I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was her. Emily. She sat on the swing near the edge of the park, slowly rocking back and forth like time had stood still for her. Her brown hair was shorter now, tucked behind her ears, and her face had softened in a way I couldn't explain. She looked older, yes, but also more delicate. My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't seen each other in over 10 years. Emily? I said, my voice more uncertain than I expected. She looked up, and when her eyes met mine, it was like something inside me cracked open. Her expression froze for a second, surprise, disbelief, and then, slowly, she smiled. Daniel, she said softly, standing up. The sound of my name in her voice stirred memories I had long buried. We walked toward each other, the silence thick but not uncomfortable. When we finally stood face to face, there was a pause. And then, almost instinctively, she gave me a light hug. I held on a second longer than I should have. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she whispered. Me neither, I replied, unsure of what else to say. We sat down on a bench and began talking, awkward at first, but gradually easing into our old rhythm. I learned that she still lived here, worked at the local library, and often came to the park when she needed to think. I come here when things feel heavy, she said, her voice trailing off. There was something in her tone, something unspoken. I watched her carefully. She looked like she was carrying something far deeper than simple nostalgia. A part of me wanted to ask, but I didn't. Not yet. Before we parted, she turned to me and said, "Would you like to get coffee tomorrow?" There's a lot I've been meaning to say, I nodded, even though my chest tightened. As she walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would change everything. The next morning felt unusually quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I found myself standing outside Willow's Cafe, the same cozy little shop we used to sneak into after school. It hadn't changed, still smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans, still had the mismatched chairs and hand-painted mugs. For a second, it felt like I'd traveled back in time. Then I saw her, Emily, already inside, seated near the window. She was staring out, lost in thought, gently tracing the rim of her mug with her finger. For a brief moment, I just watched her. There was something about her stillness that felt fragile, like glass. She looked up and smiled as I walked in. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, sitting across from her. We started slow, catching up on surface-level stuff, jobs, old classmates, her work at the library, my long hours at the agency. But beneath every word, I could feel a current pulling us deeper. "You remember how we used to hide behind that huge bookshelf in the back and read horror comics until your mom came looking for us?" she asked, eyes lighting up with a rare spark. I laughed. "Yeah, and how we'd get caught every single time." She smiled, a little wider this time. "Some things never change." We sipped our coffee in silence for a few minutes. I could tell she was waiting for the right moment to say something important, but didn't know how to start. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, then back to me, like she was caught between two worlds. Finally, I asked, "What happened after I left?" Her smile faded a bit. She looked down into her cup. "A lot," she said quietly. "I was angry at first. You left without saying goodbye. One day we were best friends, and the next, nothing." I sighed. "I didn't mean to disappear. After my dad passed, everything just fell apart. I wasn't thinking straight. I know, she said gently. I figured that out later. But it still hurt. There was a pause. Then, almost like it took everything in her, she reached across the table and held my hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. I'm not angry anymore, she said softly. But I need to tell you something. Something I've kept inside for too long. My heart beat louder. Just then, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and I saw the shift in her expression. Her face tightened. I'm sorry, she said, standing up. I have to take this. I watched her walk away, phone to her ear, her voice muffled by the distance. She stood outside the cafe for a long time. I could see her through the window, pacing, wiping her eyes, nodding slowly. My stomach turned with anxiety. I didn't know what that call was about, but something wasn't right. When she returned, her face had changed. I'm sorry, she said again. Can we talk more tomorrow? I nodded, not trusting my voice. She gave me a soft smile, but her eyes were clouded. And just like that, she left again, taking the words I needed to hear with her. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face, the look in her eyes just before she took that phone call. Something about it haunted me. It wasn't just distraction. It was fear. And when she came back into the cafe, she wasn't the same. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dim and silent, wondering what I had missed. What was she about to say before the phone rang? Why was it so hard for her to say it now? The next morning, I wandered the streets with no destination. Just walking. Thinking. Trying to remember who she used to be and trying to understand who she was now. We had been so close once. As kids, she was my anchor, my safe place. No matter what was happening at home or school, I could always count on Emily to bring light. But I had disappeared when things got hard. And maybe, just maybe, she never stopped waiting for me to come back. That thought stayed with me. By late afternoon, I went back to the park, our park. I didn't text her. I just hoped she'd show up again. And she did. She arrived quietly, wearing the same soft blue cardigan she'd worn the day before. Her steps were slower, almost hesitant. When she saw me on the bench, she smiled. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. You always did show up where I least expected you, she said, sitting beside me. Some habits never change, I replied, forcing a smile. For a while, we said nothing. Just sat and listened to the wind rustling the leaves. Then, finally, she turned to me. I'm sorry about yesterday, she said. That call, it wasn't something I wanted to take. Was it bad news? I asked gently. She hesitated, then looked down. You could say that. But I'll tell you everything tomorrow. I promise. Why not now? She met my eyes then, and for the first time, I saw it fear. Not the kind that came from something external, but the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. Because if I tell you now, she said softly, I won't get through it without breaking. And I don't want to cry in front of you. Not yet. My chest tightened. You don't have to protect me, Emily. Whatever it is, just say it. She gave a faint smile, then reached out again, held my hand, tighter this time. Her fingers trembled. I waited for you, she said. For years. Even when everyone told me you weren't coming back. I still hoped. My breath caught. Emily, she pulled her hand back suddenly, as if afraid of what she'd just said. Her eyes brimmed with something she wouldn't let fall. Tomorrow, she whispered, standing up. Meet me at the lake. 5 p.m. Okay. I nodded, though everything inside me screamed to stop her from walking away again. As she disappeared down the path, I realized this wasn't just about us. She was carrying something bigger. And it was about to come crashing down. The next morning felt unusually heavy, like the sky itself knew something was about to shift. Clouds hung low, and the wind carried the scent of rain. I spent the day restless, checking the time every few minutes, counting down to 5 o'clock like my life depended on it. I didn't go straight to the lake. I took a detour to my old house. It had been years since I'd stepped inside. The wooden gate creaked as I pushed it open. The house stood in silence, weathered and forgotten, but somehow still holding echoes of my childhood. Dust clung to every surface and cobwebs decorated the corners of every room. I walked through it like a ghost, touching memories, reliving shadows. In my old bedroom, I found a box labeled Daniel, keep in my mother's handwriting. I sat down and opened it. Inside were photos, school awards, drawings, and then one picture that made my heart stop. It was a photo of me and Emily, taken when we were maybe 11. We were at the lake, soaked from the water, laughing like the world had no edges. On the back, written in delicate handwriting I recognized instantly, were the words, "You'll always be my reason to smile." I stared at the message, my throat tightening. She had written this? When? Why had I never seen it before? As the clock crept closer to 5, I grabbed the photo and headed to the lake. The lake was exactly how I remembered it, quiet, surrounded by willows, the water still and soft like glass. Emily was already there, standing by the edge, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked out at the water, unaware of my approach. When I finally stepped beside her, she didn't turn. "I used to come here every summer after you left," she said. "Sat in the same spot. Skipped stones. Pretended you were sitting next to me." I didn't know what to say. I simply reached into my pocket and handed her the photo. She took it, studied it for a long moment, then pressed it to her chest. Her eyes glistened. "You kept it," I said softly. "I never threw it away," she whispered. "No matter how angry I got. I couldn't." She finally turned to face me. "Daniel, I need to tell you what I couldn't say yesterday." I held my breath. She reached for my hand again. Her grip was firmer this time. "I loved you," she said. "Not just when we were kids. Always. Even when you disappeared. Even when I tried to move on." I stood frozen. "But there's more," she added, her voice cracking. "And it's not easy to say." She looked down, breathing deeply. "I got sick. A while ago. And it's serious." The world seemed to tilt. I wanted to speak, to comfort her, to ask 1,000 questions, but she stepped back, shaking her head gently. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything. I just needed you to know this first." And then she walked away, leaving behind the sound of water and the echo of truth I wasn't ready to face. I didn't sleep. Again. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, holding the photo of us like it could answer the questions spinning in my mind. Emily's words echoed endlessly. "I got sick, and it's serious." What did that mean? Was there time? Was there hope? And then there was something else, her confession. "I loved you, always." I didn't deserve it. I left without a word. And still, she waited. The silence of the night was broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. And then a soft noise at the door. A faint shuffle. I sat up. When I opened the door, no one was there. But lying on the floor was an envelope. No name, just my address written neatly on the front. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Emily's. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. Inside was a letter, 3 pages long, handwritten, every word weighted with emotion. The first line made my breath catch. "If you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage I've lacked for years." She began with our childhood. How she remembered every silly joke I told. How I made her laugh even on days when her home felt cold and empty. How she'd sneak cookies into my backpack when I forgot lunch. Then she wrote about the day I left. "I stood outside your house for hours after I heard. I thought maybe it was a mistake. That you'd come back for something. You didn't." She described how she kept coming to the lake every year on the same day, my birthday. She said it was her way of keeping the connection alive. Even when life moved on around her, she stayed stuck in that space. Then, near the bottom of the second page, she finally wrote what she hadn't said at the lake. "Last year, I was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. The doctors say it's progressive, that I may have less time than I hoped. I didn't tell you to make you feel guilty. I just wanted to be honest, finally." My hands tightened on the page. I couldn't breathe. "You deserve to know. And I needed you to hear it from me before my body forces me into silence." She ended the letter with this. "Despite everything, I still smile when I think of you. You were my first love, Daniel. And no matter what happens, I want you to know you mattered. You always mattered." I sat frozen, the letter trembling in my hands, my eyes wet with tears I couldn't hold back. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Like I had just read someone's goodbye written in ink but soaked in emotion. I stood, heart racing, pulled on my jacket, and ran out the door. I didn't care about the time. I just knew I had to find her. The streets blurred around me as I ran through the night. Her letter gripped in my hand like it was all I had left of her. The wind cut against my skin, but I didn't care. I didn't even stop to think, I just knew I had to find Emily. I tried her house first, pounding on the door until her elderly neighbor opened it in a robe, startled. "She's not here," she said gently. "They took her to the hospital last night." I froze. "Which hospital?" I asked, barely breathing. 15 minutes later, I was in the lobby of St. Clair Medical Center, a place I hadn't stepped into since my father died. It smelled the same, sterile, cold, quiet. My stomach churned. At the reception desk, I gave her full name. The nurse looked at the screen, then nodded. "Room 317. Third floor. She's stable for now." For now. Those two words echoed like thunder in my head. I took the stairs. I didn't want to wait for the elevator. I didn't want to be still for a second. When I reached her room, I hesitated. My hand hovered just above the handle. What if she didn't want to see me like this? What if it was too late? I pushed the door open anyway. And there she was, Emily, lying in bed, pale but peaceful. A thin line ran from her nose to an oxygen machine. Her eyes were closed. She looked small. Too small. I stepped closer, my heart breaking with every breath she took. Then, her eyes fluttered open. She blinked, and when she saw me, a soft smile touched her lips. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey," I said, my voice cracking. She reached out a hand. I rushed to her side and took it, holding it between both of mine. It was warm, delicate, alive. "You read the letter?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said slowly. "But I couldn't keep pretending. Not after seeing you again." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She gave a faint laugh. "Because I was scared. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be remembered as the girl who fell apart." I leaned in closer. "You're not falling apart, Emily. You're braver than anyone I've ever known." She looked away, swallowing hard. "They say it's getting worse. The condition. That I might need surgery. A transplant if I'm lucky." I tightened my grip on her hand. "Then we fight. Whatever it takes. I'm here." Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away but didn't let go of my hand. "I'm sorry I dropped everything and disappeared," I said. "I was hurting, but that doesn't excuse what I did to you." She gave the smallest nod. "You're here now." And then, in that quiet hospital room, with machines beeping softly around us, she whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." The room felt suspended in time. Outside the hospital window, the world carried on, cars moved, people walked, clouds shifted, but inside, everything was still. Just her, just me, and the heavy truth between us. Emily's hand remained in mine. Her grip had grown weaker, but it was still there. That small connection. That quiet thread holding us together after all these years apart. "I used to dream of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of what?" I asked gently. "You sitting beside me," she said, turning her head slowly to look at me. "Not in a hospital bed, obviously," she added with a weak smile. "But, you. Just being here." I tried to return her smile, but my throat was too tight. "I have to tell you something," she said suddenly, her expression growing serious. "I need to say it now because I don't want to leave anything unsaid again." I braced myself. She exhaled slowly, eyes searching mine. Then she said it. "You were the love of my life, Daniel. And you didn't even know it." I felt something in my chest crack. "I used to write your name in the margins of my books," she continued. "I waited at that lake for your return every summer. I told myself it was stupid, but I did it anyway. I wanted to believe you'd come back and everything would make sense again." Tears slid down her cheeks, and I reached up to wipe them away, my own vision already blurred. "Emily. I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't know how much I meant to you. I thought I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin it," she said. "You just delayed it. And I don't blame you. Life happens. People disappear. But I need you to know that I never stopped caring. Not once. She squeezed my hand, just barely, and added, and if this is all the time we get, I want to spend it with you. Without pretending. Without regrets. I nodded, my heart breaking and swelling at the same time. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice shaking. Whatever happens next, we face it together. A moment passed between us, the kind of moment that only exists when everything else falls away, just two souls, finally speaking the words they'd held in too long. She looked up at me with tired but grateful eyes. You make me feel like I'm not dying, just living slower than most people. That made me cry. Not just a tear or two, I broke. Right there, in that hospital room, with her hand in mine and her heart wide open. Because the truth was, I had loved her too. Maybe I always had. And now I knew I couldn't waste another second pretending I didn't. The days that followed were slow, gentle, and sacred. I extended my stay without a second thought. My old job? My apartment? My entire city life? It all felt so far away, like it belonged to a different version of me. One who hadn't sat beside a hospital bed and learned what love really meant. Emily's condition remained fragile, but her spirit, somehow, grew stronger every day I stayed by her side. The doctors were cautiously hopeful. A transplant might be possible. There were risks, yes, but there was also a sliver of light. And sometimes, a sliver is all you need. We spent hours talking, reading old letters she had kept, watching the rain from the window, and laughing at ridiculous memories from childhood. In those quiet moments, I realized something. We weren't mourning the past anymore. We were reclaiming it. A few weeks later, the hospital finally discharged her. She had to return regularly for checkups, and the transplant list was long. But she was home. And I was still by her side. One morning, we walked to Maplewood Park, the same place where we had reunited. The sky was clear. The air was warm. Everything felt full of life. Emily wore her blue cardigan and a scarf loosely wrapped around her neck. Her steps were careful but determined. She didn't want to use the wheelchair today. Not when I've come this far, she said. We reached the same old bench near the swing set, and she sat down slowly. I sat beside her. A silence settled over us, but not an empty one. It was peaceful, like the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. She turned to me, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in weeks. You know, she said, slipping her fingers into mine, the day I held your hand and told you how I felt. I thought I'd never get that moment. I thought I'd waited too long. I squeezed her hand, smiling. But you didn't. She leaned her head on my shoulder. No, I didn't. We sat there for a while, just watching the leaves sway in the breeze. I thought about everything we had been through. The pain, the guilt, the lost time. But also the healing, the honesty, the love that had quietly waited between us all those years. And then, in the softest voice, Emily whispered, I'm not afraid anymore. Neither was I. Later that evening, as we walked back toward her house, hand in hand, I looked at her and said, You changed everything for me, Emily. She smiled gently and replied, You came back when it mattered most. That's all I ever needed. One